What's going on, Packers fans? Aaron Nagler here, joined by Mark Oldacres, who is a contributor for us at CHTV. Mark, thanks so much for making some time today, man.
No worries. Always good to chat with you, Aaron.
So the draft is fast approaching. The Cheesehead TV draft guide is available. You out there can find your copy in a link in the description of this video if you so choose and you're so inclined and interested, etc. But Mark, I wanted to talk about something you wrote for Cheesehead TV that I thought was really interesting in a little kind of different way of looking at the draft and the Packers' approach and their needs and how it might fit into, you know, guys who will be available at positions of need where there are kind of maybe log jams or potential, log jams of guys at positions where the Packers will hopefully have their pick of the litter, so to speak. First of all, I know you reference a lot in the article about the consensus board when it comes to, trying to figure out where guys may fall. Can you tell people what the consensus board is and how you use it? Because I think people hear that term a lot. I know we talk about it on draft night quite a bit. But can you tell people what it is and how you use it?
Yeah, so the consensus board that I've been using is it's from a website called NFL Mock Draft Database, and what it basically does is just throws together from throughout the internet a bunch of big boards out there. I think they say there's 134 big boards with player rankings that come together to kind of make these consensus player rankings. So the reason I wanted to just use that for the article was just to kind of get that perspective, not that kind of how I think, that
Right.
this is strong. What's the consensus and kind of like where the draft is weaker and stronger at different positions, and kind of how does that line up with what the Packers need? As much as we don't like to draft for need in the upcoming
It's
draft,
always best player available at a position of need.
yeah, which
we
is
know
kind
this.
of the point of why I wanted to do it, though, as well,
Right.
is to kind of say, well, if that's the mantra, if it's best player available throughout the draft, then here's where you're going to do that. Here's what's probably going to be available to you at the best position is going to be kind of in each round. I think I broke it up for the article. I broke it up in sort of like lumps of 50 rather than per round, so like 50 picks at a time.
And I'm really glad you did that. If for no other reason than the way where the Packers are drafting, right? Especially in the first round, when you look at pick 25, I hear so much about, oh, he's not, quote, worth a first round pick. And I think people kind of get caught up in this imaginary line between 32 and 33, right?
Yeah,
Where
100%.
obviously there is some material difference in the sense that you have a bit more control as a team with the fifth year option. But outside of that, when you're talking about tiers of players and their talent level and their ceilings, etc., it's like there's not a huge difference between like 25 and say 31. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Or even 34 or something like that. So I'm really glad you did it this way, because you have like picks 1 through 50 and the Packers have 25 and 41 as it sits right now.
Yeah.
How do you see that falling? Where do you think, positionally the strengths may lie, especially considering what the Packers need?
Yeah, well, I think kind of the strongest positions that I found. Again, this is just the consensus board, and this can change, all the time. I actually had an issue with that where I was mid writing it and hadn't got to the end, and then like the board changed overnight, and I had to completely redo one part of it. But where it stood as of when I wrote this article, anyway, and I don't think the top changes too much. But the strongest positions outside of kind of quarterback, in terms of the guys that are expected to go in the top 50 at least, is wide receiver and offensive tackle. This is, as everyone kind of knows, just from even a cursory knowledge of this year's draft, it's another insanely strong wide receiver class. It seems to happen every single year. And while that's not something that the Packers need specifically right now, and something they've definitely stayed away from in the first round in the last 20 years.
A long time. Very long
There
time.
is a really strong players, and then offensive tackle being the other one is obviously kind of going to be maybe the point where Packers fans are thinking, okay, that's probably where we're gonna go. And if that is the way the Packers want to go, there's going to be a lot of really good options. I think there's players that ordinarily would probably end up going in the top half of the first round that are just going to fall because there's so many of them this year. The only problem with the Packers side of that is that the Packers seem to have offensive line seems to be one of the more specific positions they get in terms of what they look for athletically and size.
Right.
Not only can players be too small, they can be too big for the Packers.
Mims,
On the
anyone?
offensive line, yeah. Like when I'm seeing like Amarius Mims and JC Latham and players like this, like
Who,
mock to Green Bay.
who, by the way, I literally just found out Mims is in Green Bay today. So
Oh, really? Well,
they're at
it
least
doesn't
they're at least
surprise me
talking to him.
that they have him in for a visit. I think they had. I remember last year they had Darnell Wright in for a visit, and he was a big guy too. So maybe it's something they would do, but it's not something they have done. Classically in the last kind of 20 years, and maybe sometimes just with what the draft gives you, you have to kind of like just bend to it. And if you think there's a guy that, okay, yeah, he's bigger than what we usually go for, but he's athletic, we don't think that it's going to be an issue that he's too big, kind of thing. He's 340 pounds or whatever it is, or 335 pounds. There's going to be good options there, and that seems to kind of be the strongest position that the Packers have a need at in the first top 50 picks. It looks like that anyway.
Yeah, I'll be very surprised. The closer we get to the draft, I'll be very surprised if they are at 25, and hey, they could move. It's a possibility.
Yeah.
But if they are at 25, I think the odds-on favorite has to be an offensive lineman. Now, if it's a tackle, a strict tackle, or even an interior guy, who knows? I do think the Graham Bartons of the world will have something to say if they're available, right? But yeah, the more you look at it, and then to your point, it just feels like there will be premium talent kind of available at tackle simply because of the numbers game. As you say, there is a ton of talent available, but also how things are supposed to supposedly shake out at the top of the draft. We know the Vikings are seemingly, angling to get up there and take a quarterback.
Yeah.
I think there are going to be a lot of quarterbacks taken in that top 5, top 10 range, and that's going to push a few more prospects down the board, so to speak. And I think it's going to fall right into the Packers' lap that way.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm seeing stuff today about kind of from Ian Rappaport that the consensus seems to be growing that Michael Penix is going to end up going maybe even in the top half of the first round, which would be great news for Packers fans.
Nuts to me, but
because that is insane. Like that is so far off where he should be going. But I mean, when you've got teams like the Raiders and the Sean Payton's Broncos in the top 15, they're going to chase a quarterback. It's going to happen. So
right.
It'd be great news for Green Bay if it does and kind of knocks that talent down even further.
And then you look at the next 50 selections, right? 51 through 100. And I would think I would categorize it as like kind of the meat and potatoes of this Packers draft, right? Where you have 3 selections, 58, 88, and 91. This is where you can really set yourself up if you're Brian Gutekunst. And not just by selecting guys. Obviously, you can trade up or down. You can maneuver however you want because you've got the ammo. How does the board fall here, consensus-wise, and how does it match up with what the Packers need?
Yeah, so it seems to be kind of the most just the numbers wise that I found in the consensus board there was cornerback and edge were kind of the two, and I think again it's kind of interesting because that's once again 2 positions where one of them you'd think that is somewhere where the Packers kind of would be looking to add, and one where you'd think maybe it isn't. In terms of edge rusher, maybe they spent a first round pick on Lucas Van Ness last year, and a lot of people would tell you kind of like you take a freak pass rusher in the first round or you don't take one. Like, that seems to be kind of the thought process. But a cornerback, obviously, cornerback and offensive tackle are the 2 positions purely because the depth and strength of linebacker and safety are just not good in this draft. That it seems to be the consensus on Twitter is that the Packers are either going to take an offensive lineman or a cornerback in the first round or with their first pick. And either way, one group of people is going to say they didn't need that. Like that seems to be where we're at right 100%.
Now. 100%. Yeah. Justice is, heading up his own one-man crusade about how the Packers don't need a corner at all. God bless him.
Yeah. And then there's other people that are like, I'm totally good with the offensive line. As stands, you get depth later on and we're fine. Like Rasheed Walker, left tackle, good to go. Like, let's do it. So, yeah, it's like, it seems to be one of those situations. But day 2, like between second and third round cornerbacks, there seems to be some good depth there. I know Max Melton is kind of a name at the moment that a lot of Packers fans, right, logically so, are kind of like grabbing onto, but there's other guys in there as well that are kind of big, fast that they like Cam Hart from Notre Dame's another one, and TJ Tampa as well. He's not as quick, but he's a big physical corner that they tend to gravitate more towards. And I think a corner kind of second round could make sense because it's not as big of as an investment that you're making compared to that first round pick when you do probably still have, at least the Packers do, hopes that Eric Stokes is going to turn it around. I mean, it's easy for us to kind of sit here and say, you can't go into next season banking on anything from Eric Stokes, but we don't have anywhere near as much information on Eric Stokes as the Green Bay Packers do. So I
No,
think
100%.
that's part of it. So a second round pick, maybe you can stomach it a little bit more if you're Justice Mosqueda, who thinks that they don't need one in round one.
Shout
But
out Justice, we love you, buddy.
shout out Justice, yeah. And then yeah, edge rusher. There are some nice players that are probably going to go on day two. Adisa Isaac from Penn State. He's not the most popular name from Penn State. Chop Robinson is kind of the headline edge rusher there, but Adisa Isaac had a ton of production at Penn State and tested well as well. There's some good players there. Chris Braswell has to be like the least talked about Alabama pass rusher I think I've ever seen. Like for someone who played
Right.
so well, like he's a really good prospect, but he just in a
Don't hear
normal
his
year
name a
it seems
lot,
like he would
right.
be pumped up a little bit more. But yeah, so there's definitely options there, and with the Enigbare situation at edge rusher, that him being out and kind of I know it's been talked about a little bit, kind of this tree of defensive system seems to kind of really value having multiple edge rushers even more than most defensive systems do. So I think it wouldn't surprise me at all, second round, third round, if that's where they go.
Yeah, and then you get to the next 50, 101 to 150, and the Packers have one pick here, and it's towards the end of this kind of run at 125, right? It's interesting because this entire chat we've had, we have not mentioned the safety position once, either from a position of, oh gosh, they got to go get one, or even, oh, there's some depth here as far as the consensus board goes. But it seems like this is the area where it probably would make sense for the Packers to target a safety if they are going to.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. And listen, it's tough. Like going through this article, I'm well aware that people are going to read it and be like, "Are you kidding me? They're not going to take a safety till pick
Well,
125."
maybe they don't.
But
If
like,
the board falls a certain
if
way,
it doesn't fall that
value-wise,
way, yeah,
doesn't
don't do
surprise
it. I
me at
mean,
all. Exactly.
it. Yeah, I mean, there's like a couple guys for me. Really, there's only seems to be kind of two guys now. I think that you could realistically expect the Packers to actually take in like the second round, which would be maybe Javon Bullard and Jaden Hicks, because Cameron Kinchins and Tyler Nubin just tested so badly that I just can't see them doing it in the second round, even if Tyler Nubin was injured when he tested, which didn't do any favors. But this does seem to be again like the range. But I will say that I think the consensus board may be a little bit low on someone like a Cole Bishop, who is in this range on their board, or he at least was when I wrote it, and he seems to be really rising up. I don't think he's going to get anywhere near pick 125 now, but there's still other good options there who are kind of those athletes again that they look for. Adrian Taylor Demerson is one. Kitano Ladapo just visited with Green Bay, and he's a player I really like too. So
Love this kid. Yes.
he's so physical. His tape is really good. I'm surprised that he's kind of being slept on a little bit, and his testing was like plenty good enough, I think, for Green Bay. So yeah, I think again it would make some Packers fans uncomfortable if we get to the back end of what is it, round 4 here we're looking at,
right.
For them to be finally taking a safety, but this looks like the place to do it. And then running back is another one which I think this feels right, because they picked up Josh Jacobs. If he performs how they want him to perform, expect him to perform, then he's going to be able to carry the load for multiple years. You don't need to go out and spend a second round pick on a running back in a draft that maybe isn't the best at the top end of the position group. And there's still plenty of guys that can help you kind of once you get to this range. Marshawn Lloyd, Aldrick Estime, Will Shipley is a really interesting option as well. So there's guys there, and you just need depth in that running back room. Really, you would think you don't need someone to come in and just be the guy. So I think that would kind of be a good spot for running back.
And then you go to 151 through 200. The Packers have selection 168. Again, only one kind of pick during this 50 pick run. Where does this fall as far as, at this point you are taking some real kind of swings, right? You're really not expecting to find a perfect prospect, but if there is a kind of area or two of depth in this kind of section of the draft, where would it lie?
Well, there's actually, unfortunately for Green Bay, because they have so few picks in this range, this is like where it gets thin, with one pick in the previous kind of band of 50 and then only one pick in this. There's so much depth at like good positions they could use some bodies at, kind of in this range. So I do wonder whether they kind of try and use a couple of those later picks to get up and just get like another one in this range, because there's so many. I mean, interior offensive line is a big one in this section, and this kind of jives with what the Packers usually do, especially day 3 of the draft. Like they love to just take swings at offensive linemen, college tackles, turn them into guards, and that's what kind of on the consensus board, it does account for players that they just expect to be interior offensive linemen at the next level. So a lot of those names that are like college tackles that the Packers are just going to take and throw them inside to guard, like a Brandon Coleman from TCU or Satawa Laumea from, I believe he's from Utah. Players like that, like it's just Packer all over. Like they're never going to play tackle for the Green Bay. They're just going to kick
Right.
inside. Like John Runyon, players like that. They took in the 6th round, I think it was. Like this is where they live. And then, but then there's a ton of depth at kind of other positions as well. Edge rusher again. There's a lot of kind of developmental guys who are athletes, kind of at this range, which that could be an option for the Packers if they want maybe a deeper backup behind kind of the 3 guys that they have already. Linebacker is kind of a big one here too.
Yeah.
And obviously that's going to be a position the Packers are going to focus on. And don't get me wrong, if the right player falls to them in say again the 2nd round, like an Edgerrin Cooper or Peyton Wilson, somebody like that, and they pull the trigger, wouldn't surprise me at all. But I just if it doesn't fall the right way and you end up in this part of the draft, again, you just need depth at this point. And there are again players in here that are kind of those athletes that they look for, that their tape isn't great, but it's kind of like, well, they'll help you on special teams if nothing else, you know? So,
right. No doubt.
And it kind of seems like, I would imagine, even if they took a linebacker in the 2nd round, I think day one, start of the season, first game, it's going to be Quay Walker and Isaiah McDuffie. I can't see it not being those two, the first two
More than
thrown out there.
likely, right? More than likely.
Just purely because of McDuffie's kind of experience with Hafley and stuff. I think just kind of especially we know how the Packers like to do things, bring like rookies along slowly. I can just see the familiarity that they'll want to kind of start it out that way. But yeah, there's some options here. I mean, like Curtis Jacobs from Penn State is a really good athlete. His tape was so, but it's one of those positions where they need bodies. They really are light. So maybe just, again, if you can get a couple picks in this range, do you take even 2 linebackers and just have them all compete and just see what kind of shakes out?
And we've seen Brian do that, right? As far as doubling up at positions, even tripling up at times. One thing I was kind of wondering about, and like this is the type of thing I would do because I'm a terrible GM, but you look at the final kind of swath of picks, 201 through 257. The Packers have 4 selections there, right? 201, 219, 245, and 255. If I'm the GM, I package those up and get up into the range of the 5th, 6th round for the exact reason you're talking about, as far as there's going to be depth at positions that I need. And we're really throwing darts once we get to the 7th round. But I know Brian will most likely stick with those picks and make them all and bring as much competition into camp as possible. That won't surprise me whatsoever if that were to occur.
Yeah, I agree, and he does seem to have kind of stuck with those picks later. I mean, how many years in a row have we been there on the draft party?
Oh my god!
Thinking, oh my god, please just trade up and like get rid of a couple of these 7th round picks.
Begging you, man.
And he doesn't do it. He just sticks some picks, and
I'll bet he drafts a punter this year just to really.
Yeah, I mean, wouldn't surprise me. He's done it before. He could do it again. So yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you. I think having 4 picks in this range and only 2 in the previous 2 combined kind of like makes me think, okay, if there's a player you like, just get up there, like just get back up into that range, because there's going to be good talent there. But I mean, again, even in this last part, there's still players kind of to like. And I think again, it's that interior offensive line or offensive tackle kind of, you know, if they somehow manage to kind of survive out there. There's players in there that I like. I mean, Walter Rouse, I have a much higher grade on than most. He's from Oklahoma, and he's not projected to go until kind of this range, like late 6th, 7th round. But you've got these just perfect Packers types again. I mean, Garrett Greenfield from South Dakota State, he tested out of the gym and he went to South Dakota State. It's just like, this is like Packer all over. So yeah, the offensive lineman again is a decent kind of position if you just want to get a couple guys into the room and let them compete, which they're going to need to. And then I think other than that, it's kind of like defensive linemen, which isn't something we've talked about yet. But there's a couple guys at the top of the draft that are really, really good players, the guys that I like. But it's not super kind of saturated up there. It's kind of like pick your guy. Like if Chris Jenkins falls to you in the 2nd round, like go for it. He's so good. Like, love him. He's such a good player, and he would bring kind of like the run defense side that they just like really don't have at the moment. So he can't rush the passer basically at all, but it's like, that's fine. Like everybody else can do that. That's okay. But again, if those guys just aren't there, it doesn't fall that way. Like you can get guys kind of late in the draft, and again, just kind of add a couple bodies to the room. And it might be a tough room to crack because you do have a lot of talented guys in there already. But it's if you're not going to address it the rest of the draft, maybe you get to the 6th, 7th round and think, well, let's add a body to that room, kind of thing.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I won't be surprised if that occurs whatsoever. Mark, cannot thank you enough for taking the time to walk us through it. If you guys want to check out Mark's article at cheeseheadtv.com, there's a link in the description of the video. Mark, thank you so much, man. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, man. Good to speak to you.